Hey, we're back. We're answering more questions with Joshua Williamson, creator of Superman, Nailbiter, and more. We talked about Birthright a lot, actually, in the last episode.
Yeah, that's G.I. Joe. I've written a lot of comics.
Yeah.
I've
Oh
written
my God. Yeah. Although maybe this year fewer than the last year. I
Oh
think
yeah,
last
dude.
year you reached your apex.
Yeah. There are moments. It's tough because there are times we were talking about this a little bit last time where it's like people will offer me stuff and I have to be the adult. It's saying no to things that you want to do, but
Yeah.
you're like, I know I don't have the time to do that, or I don't have the time to do it well. So you look at it and like that's always been my mind a lot lately. But yeah, I'm doing definitely less now, but I am ramping up. Like I have a lot of secret projects I'm working on. There's stuff that I'm really excited about. But a lot of it won't be out for a while. But it's funny, even this week, there was something that came up this week. Scott and I were talking about it, and we were talking about the stuff that Scott and I are planning and stuff we're talking about. And I was like, oh man, I think I figured something out. And I was explaining to him, and he was like, that sounds amazing, but do you know how much extra work that's going to be, right? And I was like, I do know. Like I'm yeah, I'm like, I know. And he was like, do you think you could do all that? And I was like, I think so. We're gonna find out.
I have to.
Yeah, well, it's one of the things where it's I don't know. It's interesting when you start to like look at this stuff, and it is you get really excited about a story, and then but it's when you look at not a comic book thing, but it's funny sometimes when you I'll use this example, right? It's like how many times has Guillermo del Toro announced that he's signed up to do a
Oh my
movie?
God, that guy! You don't ever help him like move or drive to the airport. You can't rely on him. He's gonna be like, I'm gonna make this. It's gonna be the biggest thing in the world, and then like just
Yeah, and it never happens. Yeah, I mean that's something that definitely like is funny. I have like lists and lists of books I want to do and ideas I want to do and things I want to do, and I'm always like, when am I going to get to this stuff? And that level of patience to be like, I know that there is time and stuff like that. But speaking of which, here's what we're gonna do. As we've talked a little bit. So last time I answered a bunch of questions. We did a little bit of Patreon, a little bit of the one thread, and so we're gonna wrap up that initial thread. What Sal has made me aware of is there is another thread that has like 60 questions in it. So we're gonna tackle that one in part 3. So, and what I'll do is anybody doing, maybe we'll figure this out because today we're only gonna talk for an hour. So I think what we could do is that on the next one we're gonna do the 60 thread plus any comments on the last one.
love it.
We're gonna see what we can do. We're gonna see what we can do, but I want to make sure we get everyone's questions answered as best as I can. Sometimes there's stuff I have no comments to, or
Oh yeah.
can't answer some things, and I've always talked about this where it's like I don't always feel comfortable answering questions about somebody else's book. Like I will never spoil somebody else's comic, and there are times where I think the questions kind of bounce a little too close to that. So if I ever skip your question, that is more than likely why. Is because it's other
I actually
people.
got a text the other day from someone saying one of my my question is conspicuously absent from this list. And I was like,
People are too smart. That's the
I
problem.
know. And I was like, it was absent from the list. And all I could say is, I'm sorry.
Yeah, dude, sometimes comic book people are too smart. That's all I'm gonna say. We're all little math wizards. We're all figuring shit out, and it's
Well, everything's a mystery, you know.
Oh yeah. It's very fascinating. But okay, so we're gonna dive in here. It's actually funny because the first question is one that I can't really answer to, but it is like it is Logan to be. It is I know Josh isn't in charge of scheduling, but why do you think the last 2 weeks of the month, especially the last of all the big titles from DC this week, was Hush, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Absolute Wonder Woman, and #1 with Martian Manhunter, and more big titles? I mean, I think both publishers really do try to space them out. They try to space it out across the 4 weeks. I know that is literally somebody's job at DC is to try to make sure those things are done that way. It doesn't always work out that way. And it ends up basically becoming, no one is trying to do that on purpose. No one's trying to purposely make it so there's so many books in 1 week that you can't buy them. No one is ever actually doing that. I think if it ever does happen, it's really about scheduling logistics with those teams on those books. They really do try to balance these things out. It's why it's pretty rare for Batman the Detective to be out in the same week. Like they really do try to make sure there is like a tiered system for each week. Doesn't always work out that way. But that's why I think the last couple of months have been a little bit like that. But trust me when I say they 100% really look at it as a week to week thing, and they really try to make sure that there is a balance there, that isn't overloaded. It is a bummer when that happens. All right, so the next one, what is the writer's equivalent of an artist edition? does Joshua just pour over old Alan Moore scripts for inspiration and quote feels, which I love that. A not wholly serious question. Sorry, thanks guys, love what you do. Actually, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Um, yes, I have 100% stared at Alan Moore scripts. It's funny you brought that up. Um, when DC was doing, and they still do this, they do absolute editions that have the scripts in the back. I would totally read it, and I think that it is something you should do if you're trying to write comics or want to work in comics. Get your hand as much behind the scenes resources as you can. I would go back when I was first starting out, when I was first learning to write scripts. Like, when I was a kid and I was first starting out, of course, the thing you think is like you go to the GOAT, you go to the Graceful Time, you go to Alan Moore, but and you read the Watchmen scripts, and they would release League of Extraordinary Gentlemen absolute editions that also came with script books.
Right.
And you go read those. I would read Frank Miller's Dark Knight scripts. But what was really interesting about the Watchmen ones, when those eventually came out, those were really educational because of Dave Gibbons going through and highlighting what was important, like what he cared about. And the rest of it was vibes, right? Like the rest of it is like him explaining the vibe to you. And then being like, what am I supposed to actually draw for this? Like, what is the actual? It's the Alan Moore scripts are so fascinating in that. But yeah, I've definitely gone through and read a lot of scripts. When Bendis was starting out, they did like the Power script book, they did the Ultimate Spider-Man script book. I ended up learning a lot actually. So once I kind of got away from that, I still learned a lot from like Joe Casey's Wildcats 3.0 scripts. Those were really interesting because I was, I'm friends with Dustin Nguyen, so I was literally watching him draw those scripts while, like, you know what I mean? So I could see it happen. Same thing with Jeff's scripts. I think that Jeff scripts, if at some point, I think in one of these videos, we'll probably show a sample of one of my scripts. We talked about this last time. Maybe we'll do that for the next one because today's been a kind of a crazy day. So I think the next one, maybe we'll dig into, or maybe we'll do a whole video that just digs into pitching.
I love that. Yeah.
And show the Nailbiter pitches, and Ghosted and some other creator-owned books that I've done. But if you ever look at my scripts, it's funny. Like my scripts are formatted very similar to Jeff. Way back in the day, like 20 years ago, when I got Jeff's like Rebirth script or the Doomsday Clock scripts, his style has actually changed a little bit. Like his format had changed. And mine has also changed over the years. Like mine has sort of evolved and stuff. But it's always fascinating to see what different kind of scripts are out there. Like Scott's scripts are very different from mine.
Yeah.
Jesus and I are a little closer at times. Tom's scripts are very sparse. Like he's very sparse compared to me. But also really depends on the artist too when you start getting it. But yeah, so artists, yeah, there's tons of scripts out there. And when they were doing the IEW release, the RS edition for Mark Waid and Chris Samnee's Daredevil, that's awesome because it has the scripts with Chris Samnee's notes on them. Like it has his little notes he was making as he was going, and that's always really helpful. So yeah, I should definitely check that out. That's not a jokey question. That is a good question.
Yeah.
How stressful? Oh boy, we're getting into it. All right. How stressful is it to be writing a story when you know there's an event coming up elsewhere you have to acknowledge or tie in, or do you typically know well enough ahead of time that you can plan a neutral pause in your story? It depends. As somebody who has worked on a lot of events, I am always very mindful of this, and I'm a big believer in trying to give creators as much lead time as possible. And sometimes the ground shifts underneath you, right? It does all the time. Part of why I got the job on Justice League Suicide Squad, like Justice League vs. Suicide Squad, was because I was working on Flash, and I was told at some point there were two things that were going to happen. I was going to have an issue where Wally and Barry were going to meet again, which became issue 9. So we knew that. Like that was built in. But at some point we were going to do a Justice League Suicide crossover. And at the time we thought the books were going to tie into it. So we thought that Flash would tie into it, Detective maybe. We thought that. And I was annoyingly asking about it. Because I like the Suicide Squad too, so I was always asking like, when are we doing that? When are we doing that? When are we doing that? And I was very fascinated by the idea of Barry and Captain Boomerang meeting, and so it was like, so I was asking. I was always very curious about what that was going to be, and that's what ultimately led to me getting the job writing that that event. That was my first like little event that I ever worked on. I shouldn't call it little because there's a lot of big names worked on it. But like Jay
Yeah.
Fox, first issue. It's how I worked for Howard Porter for the first time.
Oh
Tony
yeah.
Daniel. Like I really, there's a lot of really great, talented people on that. Um, and it was this big crossover between these two big franchises at a time where it was like they were really hot franchises. Um, it can be very difficult. I do think as much lead time as possible, like letting people know. I mean, that's the thing now. Whenever we're planning stuff out, that is an active part of that conversation. You know, is like making sure as many people know at this point this will happen, and are you going to cross over or not? With Flash, we didn't do a lot of those, so it's tricky because I always try to make sure they feel like they count, right? So it's like, is there any kind of impact on the actual series after that crossover? You always want to kind of play those factors in. Um, you know, it can be stressful because it does create what I like to call roadblocks. Basically, it just does, and then it is on you. I mean, this is the thing about working in comics is that you have to be quick on your feet. Like ultimately, your job in comics is to be creative, and to be creative also means problem solving. Like that's the best kind of problem solving is get creative, get outside the box, really think about it. And that is what crossovers are, those are events are. And so really that's the key. If you're given enough time to think about it, you might be grumpy. Don't get me wrong, I've had grumpy days with this, and I know other creators have too. It can be I think when it becomes repetitive, that's difficult, or you have a book where it's like constantly crossing over to stuff, that becomes a thing. Um, it can be very frustrating. I'm actually a better I like when I like the Marvel format where they do an event and they do minis that connect to it. They don't always interrupt the mainline books. You know, that can be really challenging to do. But that's it as much as possible. So it's like, you know, with Absolute Power is interesting because Absolute Power was built. Like I did a lot of the building for Absolute Power when we were doing Dark Crisis. Like we knew it was going to be about Amanda Waller. We knew powers were going to get stolen. We knew these major pieces of Absolute Power before it was even called Absolute Power. Before Wade was even brought in to write it, we knew. That's why there was so much setup for it because we had built all of that during Dark Crisis. We knew, oh, Waller is going to do these things. You know, that's why we had that teasing at Dark Crisis. So because we knew that so far out, I mean, you're talking about like summer. We basically knew in like August, September of 22 that in the summer of 24 we were doing this thing. We knew. So it was like, okay, we were able to seed that out. So that meant for me working on Superman, I always knew we were going to do these crossover issues. And so it was sort of like, okay, how do I make those issues matter to my book, you know? And the only thing that was a bit of a bummer about that was the timing was off a little bit where we went from House of Brainiac right into another event. Like I always wish we had a little bit of a gap there. What's the moral of the comic industry as of 2025? Man, I don't know. I'll that's one of the questions. I'll let you know at the end of the year. Like we'll um the moral of the comic industry as of 2025. That is a difficult question. I
Yeah.
feel there's all kinds of morals you can learn.
No, he
Um,
means morale. Like, what's the
oh,
vibe?
the morale. I misread that. I'm sorry. The
Yeah,
morale.
what's the lesson though? That's the
Oh,
writer in you. What's the
what's the
moral of this
lesson to
story?
learn from comics right now? No, the morale. I mean, hesitant. I don't know. I feel like
Cautious?
cautious, but you know, I think with some of the things that are going on, I have this. I'm going to tell you the bleakest, darkest thing I can possibly tell you that I've thought about over the last few years. The fact that all of us still continue to pay taxes means that we're all optimists at the end of the day. Like, because if we were like, it's all falling apart, we would just stop completely. You'd be like, what's even the point of that? Like, you know,
Yeah.
it's these things where it's like life kind of goes on in a weird way. Like, I've noticed this constantly. I mean, the fact that like, you know, there are days where you're like, holy shit, the world is on fire, but they just released a trailer for a movie I want to see. Like,
But boy, I
you
hope
know
the
what I mean?
theaters
You're
are
like,
still
oh
standing.
shit, we
Yeah.
might all be gone in 2 months, but guess what? That movie's come out in month 3, so I guess we're gonna be all right. Like,
Yeah.
my bleak days. I think about like, what if you were? It's that movie. I forget what it was called. That movie where the guy was dying, but he wanted to see Phantom Menace. I forget
Oh,
what that movie.
fanboys.
Fanboys, yeah, dude. I think about that all the time. Where I'm like, man, like just those kinds of ideas of how the film industry, oddly enough, the film industry is sort of continuing no
Right.
matter what, like entertainment continuing no matter what, creates a weird version of optimism, but also delusion. Like it's such an interesting thing. But what is the morale of the industry? I mean, you know, I mean, people seem a weird mix of cautious and hopeful, but also not. There are very bleak days.
Yeah.
So All right. I was wondering how often writers are forced to change their story midway through due to editorial mandate tie-ins events. That's tough. There are times I've pitched things to editors and they said no. It happens. I feel like I'm very blessed and privileged right now that I definitely have a really good communication with most publishers I work with. I can talk about things ahead of time. Like I can kind of get a vibe of what's working way out in advance. Um, I'm trying to think if I ever had to even change anything that I was doing. I've
Mm.
been really lucky at DC for the most part. There are roadblocks, but again, that's part of being creative is trying to work your way around those roadblocks. Um, it depends. I know there are situations where writers have had to do like whole cloth changes. I mean, you're talking about like rewriting scripts for things that definitely has happened. I've only had to rewrite a script completely, maybe 2 or 3 times because of some kind of editorial and or like, oh, this thing is coming, you got to change it, kind
Yeah.
of thing. Or it was like there was miscommunication. I know there are characters that does, or there are books. I'm sorry. I know there are books where that does happen and has happened. I know there are definitely horror stories. I don't know if there's a way of pinpointing like an average amount of times to be like, oh, well, every writer goes through this 10 times. It's like, who knows? There are probably writers who are like, I have been screwed multiple times, months upon months. And then there's some people who are like, I had it happen a couple of times and it sucked. And also that's how you respond to it too.
Yeah.
There are some writers I know that like they get one note and they go, cool, I'm good. Bye. Like, and here's the thing though, because you don't want to do something you don't want to do,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Like, you don't
true.
want to, you know what I mean? Like, you don't. No one's gonna make you do anything. I
Yeah.
mean, no one's gonna make you do anything. It's always your choice.
Yeah.
Realistically, you could say, I don't feel comfortable with this, or I don't want to do this, and you walk. I mean, that does happen. I know some writers that is very much where their attitude is at sometimes, and it's like, and I don't fault that at all, because you don't want to. We talked about this, where it's like you better like that book you're working on.
Because you're gonna be working on it like for a
You're gonna be
while. You're
working on
gonna be in it.
it. Yeah. You imagine? I mean, man, oh, like
Oh,
I feel pretty lucky that I've had maybe a couple instances where I was like, oh, this was a mistake, but it's like,
it's very rare and early in your career where it was like, oh,
yeah,
I shouldn't have done that,
I
or
should have done that, or this book I was never right for this book.
wasn't
You
right
you
for us.
learn, you do learn, and I think there are times where it's like you got to think about this, man. Like when you're in a world with a book, you're with those characters, you're living with that space. It is in your head. Like I'm not sitting here. I don't. I'm actually a fairly quick typer, right? And there's a difference. I'm not sure we talked about this last time. There is a difference between writing and typing.
Oh yeah.
And the trap people fall into is they think typing is the writing part, and it's like, no, no, no. The writing part is up here, right? It's notebooks, it's whiteboard, it's figuring out, it's notes. You might be typing up notes, but it's interesting to talk to writers because I'm like, I can type a script up in 2 days,
Hmm.
but it might take me a couple weeks to figure out what that script's going to be.
Totally.
Um, there's this Kirkman quote, and I don't know if he still applies this, but Robert wrote this thing a long time ago where he was like, writing a script either takes me 3 days or 3 weeks
Hmm.
because sometimes either you got it or you don't.
Yeah.
And once you have it, then it's like, oh man, it's like you can't. You have to. You're trying to keep up with it.
Right.
You're trying to get it on paper as fast as you can because those ideas are going. Like there are times where I'm like, there are times where you might be struggling. All of a sudden, you're like, dude, I have it, and you write like 5 pages in an hour because you just boom, you just know it. And then sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes that 5 pages might take you a week. It might take you all day. You might be like, oh my god, I'm struggling to get one page out, right? Because it's not there. And that's really the reality is it's not there. So, yeah, it takes some time. All right, I'm gonna keep going.
Sure.
Which character you like to write the most for in GI Joe? Depends on the day. Sometimes it's Cobra Commander. Sometimes it's Clutch. Sometimes it's Baroness. Like sometimes it's Duke. They're all interesting. I kind of give each person like a little bit of a thing for each one. That kind of is
Yeah.
a North Star for that character. And I can hear their voices really strong. But those are probably my top four. I would say are them. I mean, I like all of them right now. It's like I really like Stalker. I like the new character we created named Risk, who hasn't been in the book much in the scripts I'm writing right now. Destro is really interesting. Mercer is always fun to write, but I would definitely say Cobra Commander, Clutch, Baroness, and Duke are probably the ones I like the most. The next question: would you ever revisit the world of Birthright? No, and this is why I think about this a bit. Because it's like every once in a while I'll watch a fantasy movie or something like that, and I'm like, oh, I wonder if I'll ever revisit fantasy. But I also feel like we talked about this last time. I don't really
Yeah.
consider
You don't
myself.
feel like a fantasy writer.
Yeah, so I have this, I have these two. When we do the second omnibus for Birthright, it's going to be like, here are my two Birthright compendiums that are beautiful and they're well designed. They're on a shelf. Did it? You know what I mean? It's like I did it. Like
Yeah.
I feel like that's my fantasy story to tell. But you never know; things change. I don't know if I'd ever revisit because I'm just happy with the ending. I miss it sometimes. I miss it sometimes. I miss that world. I miss pieces of it, but I have other ideas that I feel are spiritual successors that I want to do. That kind of hit some of the stuff I really liked about it. So, okay, when do you know you reached the end of your story? How much time should be spent on nailing the first and last pages of an issue? I love this question. Um, Often, I guess the question I would have back is, do you mean end of story? I'm gonna maybe I'll answer both of them. But how do you know you reached the end of your story? Do you mean like I've written 50 issues of this book and this is the ending, or you mean like I'm done? I gotta turn it in because I'm done. I gotta turn it in. Is that's my deadline, or this artist has to start
Ah.
because I'm not gonna ruin their lives and make them work on the weekend as much as I can. It's like I want to make sure they have the time to do it properly. How much time should I be spent on nailing the first and last pages of an issue? Boy, um, I okay. So when people come to me and they say I have a pitch for an idea, and they start to tell me the idea, and we talked about this last time where I was like, you have to be able to say like, can you tell your buddy this idea in a bar, right? Can you sit and have just a friendly conversation with your friend and not be grandiose and use big words and be like, this is what it is, right? It's this thing, you know. I was talking about Ghosted with somebody earlier this week, and I'm like, it's Ocean's 11 in a haunted house. Can I explain that to you in the easiest way possible? Like that's it, right? Can you do that? But the question I always ask after that, it's funny, Rosenberg threw this in my face a couple of years ago. But the question I always ask people is, what is your last page?
Hmm.
Because that is the ad, especially in the first issue, that is your ad for the series, right? That is your ad for the series. It's the ad for the next issue. So I always feel like I have to know how it opens and how it ends before anything else. And sometimes that changes as you go. You might realize a better ending as you're going. But I do think you have to know your first and last page. It's funny. Like I know there's some writers that just write the page in front of them. They just write that. They just sit down. But yeah, I feel like you have to know the first and last page. And so I don't. The timing question is funny because it's not like there's a set. I don't have a clock I push and there's a timer on it. It's like,
Yeah,
it might take a while.
there is this kind of like desire to have a formula and to have like a no more than 15 minutes, no less than an hour. Like they need to have a structure because it helps
Yeah.
them like get to the point where they give themselves permission to just do it. And
Well, there
that's
is
really
something
what it is.
about. Yeah, no, I get that too, and I think that's where people are always looking at like, oh, this is how many. And I think this is one of the questions. This is how many word balloons there are. This is how many captions there are. It's like you
Yeah.
kind of get muscle memory for it. You learn by doing it. It's like, um, and it kind of changes as you go. Like there was a time where I was like, oh man, I would never do a page with more than 5 panels on it, and that is not even close to what I do now. I mean, I feel like I average around 7 panels a page now. Like that was a long time. I mean, I definitely try to keep in mind the balance of an issue. You can't have a comic be every page is 5 panels or 7 panels. You want to mix it up as best as you can, and also to help your artist out. Where it's like one day they're doing a cool splash page or a 2 page panel or two panel page, and the next day they're doing a 7 panel,
Yeah.
and then the day after that it's like, oh, here's another cool like easy 3 pager or 3 panel sequence that's really easy to do, right? Like I definitely do keep that in mind when I'm working on these things.
Yeah.
But the formula stuff is interesting. Like I was watching this video, it was Lin Manuel Miranda. I don't remember who the other person was now. I feel bad, but it was this other person. They were talking about style and the questions of style. And Lin-Manuel Miranda basically said, he was like, I believe that we are mimicking everything we love. You're mimicking all the things you love. This crazy, hodgepodge, piecemeal thing of all these things you love. You're mimicking it until it eventually becomes you, right? But so for a
Yeah.
minute there, you're going to see things that are reflective. I mean, it's like when you look at Tom King's writing and you look at, obviously there's Alan Moore influences, but if you really get deep into it, it's a lot of Keith Giffen influences. Like he has a lot of these pieces. Like Omega Man was very inspired by 5 Year Legion stuff. It's like, you can see the Alan Moore, you can see Ostrander in there if you really start digging in. But he takes all these essentially inspirations, right? The stuff you love, and you start putting it together. But at some point, you break away from that. And I think it's okay to try to learn the fundamentals, the basics, and structure like that. Like, if you feel like, oh, this is the formula that works for me, it's interesting. I'm going to tell you I probably should have let off with this about advice on writing.
Okay.
Ultimately, all advice is wrong. And this is why I say this. Ultimately, all advice is wrong. Most people's advice is purely based on their experience, and a lot of times it's advice for themselves in a weird way, right? And so when I'm giving advice, I try to keep that in mind, right? Like, I would not go to a writer who has never written comics before and they tell me something they want to do, and I would not tell them the same thing I would do, right? Like, I would just call the editor up, right? Imagine if I was like, oh, just call the editor and tell them what you're thinking about. Like,
Yeah.
could you
Like,
imagine? Yeah, that
I don't
doesn't
know
work.
them. How do I get that information?
Yeah,
Like,
like I
and
can't do
and
that.
why would they take my call? They don't know me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
there's no
could
way they could do it.
text. I could text people and be like, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? Like that. I would not recommend that to anybody because that's my advice for myself. I can do that,
Right.
but I fully recognize that you are not in that position, and I find a lot of advice comes from a place of that. A lot of times people don't mean
Uh-huh.
they do, and then really what you want to do is you want to find. So you have to take the advice or any of these things, the structure, the plotting, the rules, and find your version of it, yours. Because as a writer, ultimately that's what I want is I want you, right? And I talk about this where DC had the milestone program a couple years ago, and I was given two students, and I told them at the very beginning, I'm like, I don't want you to write like me. I want you to write like you. I'm going to help you through some of this stuff, but I want you to write like you because I'm already here, you know. And it's like, and that's even the stuff I think about. We've had this conversation about how like I'm so influenced by Mark Waid and Jeff. The last few years, I've been like, okay, I have to shed those pieces and find more of me. I had this conversation with Grant a few years ago, and that was a part of that conversation was that. And it's like that's where you got to shed these influence, you got to shed the advice because it's like at some point people are going to tell you do it like me, but that's the then I've already seen that, you know.
Right.
I think you and I had this conversation before. I was like, if you're always following somebody else, that means you're always behind.
Ah.
Got to find your own path in there. So you know, it's funny. It's like if you're driving in your car and you're like, everyone tells you this is the never deviate from this path, and then you somehow find a shortcut because you do. It's a risk. It's dangerous. You could follow. You always make it there. But what if you found a shortcut? You only know unless you try. So I do think with all advice, you have to kind of find your own path through it when you're talking about this. And that's where the stuff about, I think it's really okay to learn about structure and it's really okay to learn formulas. And it's okay to try to learn those secret magic tricks you think are going to get you in there, but then you got to find your own way. I mean, you look at all these writers that come up, they always did that. They always found their own way in there somehow. And you got to be able to do that. Sometimes that math is invisible. It's invisible at times, but you got to be able to find your way through it. Let's see here. When writing an ongoing, oh, this is the crossover question. Again, another one. When writing an ongoing series and you find out the book is tying to a crossover, for example, Superman 16 through 18, tied to the events of absolute power. How do you balance between both organically continuing the ongoing narrative, incorporating elements of the event in the book? I mean, you kind of say it in there. You just got to find that balance.
Yeah.
You got to be like, you can't make it so that when somebody comes in and you know the whole thing of like every book is possibly somebody's first kind of thing, and there's a bit of
Uh-huh.
math. You know, it's always interesting. I know Alex Segura wrote a whole thing about this recently too, but it's like basically just be mindful of it, right? It's like if somebody's coming in to read Superman 16, I just came out of House of Brainiac, so I got better make sure I continue House of Brainiac. I got to make sure I at least acknowledge it. Put 2 pages aside to freaking acknowledge what's happening in the book, the context of what's going on, and then you move the ball forward. And then it becomes a matter of how do you relay that exposition to somebody, right? Because they
Mm.
don't might be like, man, I just came in to buy Superman 16. I didn't know there was an event. You know what I mean? That happens. So it's like you got to find a way of balancing those things and try to relay that information as quickly and as efficiently as possible, and then just tell your story. It is about being mindful of it and thinking about the reader's experience. Like I'm very mindful of the reader's experience when I'm writing, so I think you do have to kind of keep that in mind. Like ultimately, you are the reader, you are the one that you should be making happy. Because again, I'm going to come back to this: if you're making a book and you're not happy with it, you should not be writing that book.
Yeah.
This job is hard, but it's not that. That's a different kind of hard. You
It
shouldn't be
shouldn't
tortured.
be hard to do the thing you want to do or
Yeah,
the
yeah,
love that you have. Like, yeah.
yeah. This is Tyler Talks Comics. What's the best way or easiest way to approach and pitch to a publisher to get your book made or even looked at? We kind of got into this last time a little bit. I do think going to conventions and talking to conventions or trying to go to conventions and meet people in person is probably the best way to go.
Yep.
But you know, that was me 20 years ago. 20, I started going to conventions when I was in like fourth grade. You know, so it's like I've been pitching comics since I was a little kid. I never told you a story before that like me and my buddies, we were in fourth grade, we had a sleepover, and we were going to go to the Shrine Convention in California, and we had read in Wizard magazine that's how you get a job in comics, you go to conventions. And so we knew there was this convention happening, and so we were like, we're going to go to this thing, and it's going to be awesome. And we were like, editors are going to be there. There were no editors there. It was like, but we made all these pitches for. We were like, we want to write X-Men. We want to do X-Men comics, and so we had all these like X-Men pitches and characters we created, and all these comics. We had like stapled them together, and we were going to go to that convention and show them our work. And there was nobody there. It was like a swap meet. I mean, the Shrine Convention is great. They'd always have like some kind of thing that was like, they always had some kind of spotlight on something.
Sure.
But it was not a convention.
Talent scouts are not going to this show. This is a
no
comic book.
There was no artist
show.
alley. There would be no artist alley. Like
Yeah.
that's the other piece of it. Like, and it was. I learned that. I mean, I eventually started going to San Diego Comic-Con when I was a teenager. I started seeing the differences were and stuff like that. Stanley used to have like a pop up that was like a Marvel convention that was really fun to go to. But same thing, you go to that, and be like Marvel editors, and then it would be like, no, here's a bunch of stuff to buy. And that's where I got my Deadpool poster at.
Really?
Yeah, my Deadpool poster. Was it one of those? Okay. Oh yeah. So listen, pitching publishers is hard. I think there are different paths you can take, but it all comes down to you have to prove you can make the book. I mean, it's funny because people are like, you could get a manager or a book agent, but you got to prove you can make a book first. And it's like that's so much what it is. That is the hardest first hurdle is make a book. I mean, I think there are different people out there now. You can make short stories. You could do a series of 8 pagers, 10 pagers. I would honestly say start as small as you can. Like, don't do here's my, and I always make this joke, don't do here's my 50 issue fantasy epic, being that I've done that. But that should not be the first thing you do, and that should not be your pitch. It's like, here's these smaller things that I would like to do, and try to generate, if you can, to make those. But really, you have to either go to those spaces, like go to online spaces, and then go to conventions if you can, and meet people, and try to find ways of making those books. For me, I mean, I was just hardcore. I was making mini comics. I was paying people out of pocket. I was like, can you draw this 10-page story for me? Kind of thing. I was doing as much of that as I could just to get that out there. I would say the mistake that I made that I would go back on was always trying to do ongoing books because my brain was so built into like, oh, books are ongoing. I would say do shorter stuff, do, like Sam Humphries. Look at Sam Humphries, right?
Yeah.
Like Sam Humphries made Our Love is Real. And it was a short little thing, and he made it. He paid for it to get made, and then he made it available. You could only order it through him, and comic shops could order it through him. And then he sold a bunch, and that got him some attention. But he had already had. Sam is interesting because Sam already had good connections from his time at MySpace. Like he was running MySpace Comics, and so he knew people.
Right.
And so he was able to like. Don't get me wrong though. He made a book that was really compelling. It was engaged. It was different. People respond to different, and so it's like he was able to do that, and then that got him the job working on Ultimates. I mean, he got brought into Marvel and was, that's really what it comes down to sometimes is really making a book and getting it in front of people. I've always heard that thing of like, you just got to make it and get it in front of people. That's really the 2 steps you got to do is really that. And I know that sounds crazy, but that's it. Okay. I guess this is another one. Let's see here. I guess my main question was how much of the steps was self-published before getting a foot in the bigger temple companies? A lot. I could do a long thing about just breaking in and just my time breaking in, but it's like, so I self-published, God, maybe. So what I ended up doing was in around 2001, I made a mini comic. And then what I did was every year I would make a mini comic. And then I would slowly, so every year I was like, here's my one comic. Here's my one thing. And then I think I got 2003 and I was like, here's 2 things. And then it was like, by 2007, I was like, here's my pitches. I mean, I had a good paying job at the time. And I put together 10 separate pitches, each one having 5 pages of art to pitch to Image. All of them got rejected. All of them. And so, but around 2007, it might have been 2006 actually, but around 2007, I started getting a little more footing in there. So it took some time. I did a lot of self-publishing beforehand. But again, it can change. You could do one book. You could do one book that gets you, like, people pay attention to you,
Yeah.
But that's really what it always comes down to. You just got to make the book, and then put your heart into it. And then one thing it's really difficult to get across, and this is something I don't like to say it's a taste thing.
Oh, but it is, isn't it? I
It is
mean,
a
like, you have to know that what you're putting out, and
yeah.
I do the same thing. We did a like 10 years ago, we made, like, a little video series called,
Mhm,
like, how to self-publish comics, and
mhm,
it was
mhm.
like it kinda blew up because people were like, "No one has frankly and earnestly, like, said to the camera, like, be real with yourself, and, like, is your book as good as a book on the shelf? Like, does
That's
this
one of the
don't lie to yourself, like, "Oh, it's done," because there's such a like, a price on "it's done" versus "it's industry level quality," what I call industry level
I
quality.
yes, I think about this a lot because I definitely have a bit of done is beautiful at times,
Which
you
is
know?
important, but you
It's
also
important.
you're in a position where you can trust that if, you know, Dan Mora is working on the book and it's done.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah, Dan will.
Right? But, like,
But
you're working with, like, self-published people too, like, you know, you're working with new people, you're
mhm,
getting
mhm.
people on, like, DeviantArt or Pencil Jack, and you're trying to find anybody to
Yeah.
just get your vision out there, and here come the pages, and they aren't what you want them to be, but they are your pages, and so you
Well,
do
look at
love them.
it's interesting because I think how would I explain this? You have to commit to it in a way, right? So I'm gonna get into a couple different things here. So Brian Michael Bendis, when he was doing Jinx and I mean Torso was with and Draco, but he was doing Jinx and Goldfish and Fire, he was drawing those books.
Yeah.
And Brian will talk about this. This is not like I'm not telling a secret thing where Brian tells that story about Joe Quesada calling him and being like, "We want to hire you," and he's like, "For art," and Joe Quesada's like, "No, your art is awful. I want to hire you as a writer." But
Yeah.
here's the thing: those books are very good. They are very good books. They are produced very well. Like Brian was making awesome comics, right? And they still to this day hold up. They are great comics. They are done really, really well. And
Mm.
even if you don't like, here's the thing about what Brian was doing at the time, because he was doing something so different. Like what he was doing, really, I think. I mean, you look at Brian is definitely one of those people that revolutionized our industry. He is a legend. You will always be able to be like, oh, that guy changed things because the amount of people ripped him off. Like you can be like, that guy is one of those guys.
Yeah.
When you look at that book, you understand what's happening. Like
Yeah.
it is clear storytelling. He's doing something different, but it is very clear storytelling. And this goes into some of those things where it's like you have to be able to like just be competent with your work. And it's like it is a bummer. I've had this conversation, especially in my early days, because sometimes you have to be able there are limitations, right? You're saying that, right? Where there are limitations depending on the artist and stuff like that. But there are ways of like, okay, we'll figure out how to work with what you have.
Yeah.
And what I end up sometimes seeing, and there's always a bummer, and actually it's been a long time since I've had this kind of conversation. But I remember years ago, like 20 years ago, I was talking to somebody. They had a lot of resources. That's what I'll just put it that they had a lot of resources, and they made this comic and they gave it to me to like, what do you think? Like, help me get this, in or whatever. And I was nobody, just a kid, but they were asking my opinion on it. And I remember looking at it and being like, this is unreadable. And asking this question, what is your favorite comic? That's what I asked them. So what's your favorite comic? And they were like, Ultimate Spider-Man. I love Ultimate Spider-Man. And I was like, and this is the original one. This is how long ago it was,
Yeah,
right?
Bagley and Bendis, yeah.
Yeah. And this is at like I think the height of that book. And I was like, great, awesome comic. Do you think these books look similar? Like, do you even in terms of lettering?
Oh,
Uh,
yeah. Yeah.
Philip, who now runs Ignition, and he was publisher. I think it was publisher at Boom for a long time. Philip used to also work at Diamond, and he was in charge of the books that would be brought into Diamond if they were gonna put them in the catalog, right? Like that was one of his jobs at one point. Was he would do like evaluate, like you send him your book, can I put this in the catalog? And they had a policy at the time. You had to send them the sample or the first issue. You had to actually look at it for them to carry it. Because that's the thing. They're not gonna like you're not Marvel DC Image where all they need is a solicit copy. It's like no, it's a product they're gonna carry. They gotta make sure it's a certain level, right?
Yeah.
And he
And that it's
rejected a book of
coming.
mine.
Like, it's like I'm ordering it from Jim,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
who's
yeah.
Jim? Am I gonna get supply? Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, but dude, they don't know. But that's the thing. Like they're a business.
Exactly.
So he actually rejected a book of mine one time. He sent me a letter saying they weren't going to do it. But I read his they weren't going to carry it in Diamond. This is back in the day when I was really hardcore self-publishing. But he said this thing one time where he was like the first thing he would look at when he would look at books was the lettering.
Yeah.
And that is something when you get really unprofessional lettering, it is a warning sign. It is a red flag that everything else is going to probably not work.
Yep.
And so when you're looking at this stuff, you have to be able to be very real with yourself and take an almost out of body experience moment to look at these things and go, why am I doing it this way? Does it hold up to what I would buy? Would I buy this book? And it's like, does this hold up? And it's interesting because you can have arguments about like taste and opinion, and I like this kind of comic or I like that kind of comic, and like I'm very thoughtful about the ways I do books for certain reasons, you know. And I think that you have to be able to do that when you're putting your book together, is be able to have like basically an out of body experience and just
Yeah.
be like, if I walked into a comic book store and I saw this, would I buy it? Would I enjoy it? Would I love it? Would I be like, I have to read this now? Like that's the stuff that I think you have to be willing to do, and it's hard sometimes. And if you get into a position where you're like, it's just you and your buddies and everybody thinks they're amazing, you know, I feel it sucks to say this in a way. I feel like I definitely have gone through hell a few times in comics, but I've also, even in my early days, like going to conventions and being like, here's my book and I'm selling mini comics, and having people be like, this sucks. And, you know, but here's the thing. And I've had this conversation with a lot of people recently of like, you can rule the world if you can do the work, if
Right.
you can actually do the work. And there are people that when I was breaking in that were like my peers who talked a really, really big game. Like when I was in college, there was a guy who he wanted to be a writer and he was going to write comics. And that guy talked the biggest game. And he was going to be a star writer, not just comics, but film and television. The entire time I was in college, that dude wrote one page. He wrote
Yeah.
one page, and he just, because he was all talk. And you have to be able to do the work, but that also means being a little self-aware of stuff. All right, so next question, as I think we're getting closer to the end here. I'm gonna try to burn through these because I only got 15 more minutes. How do you handle
um,
the economics? Oh yeah, how do you handle the economics of comic book writing? Like how many panels you use, how much dialogue to write?
we
That's
kind
a
of
muscle
covered that a little
memory.
bit, but
Yeah, that's
yeah.
a muscle memory thing at this point. You gotta, you know, you kind of know. You look at comics you like. It's always interesting. Like I look at some people and the amount of dialogue they try to shove into a page. You know, it's like you got to work on that rhythm a little bit. What were you gonna say? Did you think you were gonna say just now?
Oh, no. No, 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 I was just agreeing.
Okay.
Well, I was like, we kinda touched on that a little bit, which is
Yeah.
why I was like, "Oh, that's great." Like, we kinda like, because you're gonna see a lot of questions where it's, like, very similar kind of wheelhouse, so
Yeah, that's okay. How much research into science, physics, biology, chemistry do you typically do, and do you like doing it? It really depends. When I was on Flash, I would read a lot of stuff on science on Flash because Barry was a scientist. So I was trying. Sometimes you just get, sometimes you fudge it, you
yeah.
know, and it's in the, and because yeah, you sometimes fudge it a little bit. It depends. You can get a little fancy with it, you know,
Oh,
but
sure.
yeah, you can get a little. It's comics.
Super
Like,
science. It's okay to say, like, a freeze ray. I don't have to explain what absolute zero means. It's fine, you know?
yeah, you can get a little bit. You can get into a little bit. You know, you can kind of get into physics a little bit. It just depends. I think when you're on Flash, you kind of have to really get into it a little bit more. But otherwise, you know, it just depends. It depends on the book, the story. You know, there was a thing recently. It's in the Summer Superman special where I was trying to figure out a thing. It was driving me crazy, and I ended up doing all this research about farming. Originally, I had a whole thing I was going to do in Superman that was going to be a bit more about farming, and I just didn't get around to it. I ended up focusing more on Metropolis and Smallville than I originally thought I was going to do. So
Yeah.
I'm doing all this research on, on farming at one point. Okay, this is an interesting one. What to do about headaches? Writing with a headache is awful. All right, I'm going to get into the health thing with everybody for a moment.
Okay.
Very like take care of yourselves kind of thing. Sal and I have talked about this a bit. You know me, so I've lost about 50 pounds in the last year.
Yeah.
And it's really just going to the gym. I've never really had. It wasn't my diet necessarily that was the problem. I had two problems with my diet, and this is we're gonna get into this. I'm gonna explain this. It all has to do with the headaches. I had two problems. I sit on my ass all day working. I'm writing all the time. I used to go for walks. When Scott and I were working on the first metal, I lost 10 pounds because
Just
I was on the phone with him walking and talking about the dark multiverse.
yeah, you'll
Like,
hit 20,000 steps just by
yeah,
hashing out a story
just walking the streets. My neighbors probably thought I was a crazy person
because 'cause you're
because I'm
talking to
like,
yourself and you're
yeah, and they were like, and then Batman gets pulled in the darkness and like all this stuff. Yeah, on my headphones, just walking with Scott talking about stuff. He does the same thing. He'll go for drives and stuff, and we'll talk. Like I'll probably call him while I'm driving to the gym here in a minute. But so it's like, but the other problem was midnight snacks. I would have midnight snacks. That was the other problem. All right. So here, the reason I'm bringing this up to you, and I'm saying this to you about this question about the headaches, because I used to get crushing migraines. It would wreck me. I would lose a day of work, and I was always trying to figure out why. And so here's what I would say to you: if you have headaches, keep a journal of when your headaches are happening. What did you eat? What did you do? Because you will find a pattern for the most part. It took me basically my entire life to figure out what the patterns were for me. And I started realizing my migraines were definitely caused by certain kinds of foods, certain kinds of situations. I have sinus issues. I started realizing what the sinus issues came from. All of that came from me keeping a journal. And working with a headache and a migraine, it sucks, especially when so much of our jobs is right here.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much of it's up here. And it's a bummer when you're feeling sinus pressure in your eyes, all that stuff. So if you are having headaches, keep a journal of when you're getting headaches. You will probably find some kind of pattern. For me, what I found out was, it took me a minute to put together. I found out every time I had red meat, I would have a migraine. And then I was able to figure out that it was processed red meat. So pepperoni, particularly, it's a bummer. I can never have pepperoni pizza again because I will lose a whole day because of pepperoni pizza. Certain restaurants, certain kinds of foods will give me migraines, and I figure out the pattern. I just avoid them, and I really rarely get headaches at this point. So yeah, that's what you do about headaches. Keep a journal, and take care of
And
yourself.
drink
I think
water. It's important.
drink a lot of water. I got this gigantic water bottle over here. You and I were talking about this last time, like off the air, I think, where I was
Yeah.
like, "Do you know how much water we're supposed to drink?"
I know, and it drives me nuts because I'm like, "There's no effing way," and then I just try, and my wife is like, "Yeah,
Oh, I know. My wife's the same way. She's just like, "Yeah, I drink. This is what's been going
yeah."
on for you."
Hers
I'm
is
like,
triple the size of what you got. She's just like, "Yeah,
"Oh, dude." I'm like, "You're gonna drink how much water?" The next question: how are you? I'm fine. It's a Friday here. We're good. It's like busy.
yeah."
Um, hey, Josh, has the process for creating monthly comics changed in the last 20 years or so? This is an interesting question because I was coming up over that same time period. I imagine you have to ask somebody who was creating comics, like talking to Dan Jurgens, right? Like talking to Dan Jurgens about creating comics. I mean, dude, I love talking to creators who were like working at DC, or editors who were working at DC in the 80s, who were like, we would read the Watchmen scripts as they were being faxed in.
Oh my god.
Like coming in like 5 minutes per page, and be like, you'd read it, wait for the next one, read it. Like I yeah, there's all kinds of differences, especially when you consider how many people are digital now, like
Oh my
how
god.
much of a part digital artists, digital comics, how much that has changed things. Like, oh my god, I have no idea how they made comics without email.
Oh
How
yeah.
how how you would call people. I mean,
Yeah.
I think there's stories of like Stan would just call somebody on the phone and be like, "This is the story. All right, you have a month. Bye."
Yeah.
Or you have these stories where like all these artists would like would camp out in somebody's apartment, and I might be wrong if like Jack Kirby's like sitting in the freaking bathroom tub knocking out like a whole issue in a weekend or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
those kinds of stories. Like I love that kind of stuff, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't even know how you do that now. I mean, back then it was different because you very much had like bullpens and studios and stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas then now everyone is everywhere. I mean, that's another piece of it. I mean, for me, like my perspective on things is just, it's like what has changed is weird for me because it's like there's differences because my career is very drastically different than it was, 20 years ago. I don't even like using the word career at times. I still
Really?
feel
What do
like
you prefer to call it?
I don't
Are
know,
you afraid you're
man.
gonna jinx it?
Oh, listen, you and I'm so paranoid and superstitious that yeah, I don't even know if I would even say that. And we're running out of time. I'm gonna answer some questions. Okay.
Yeah.
What character poses the biggest challenge in terms of character creation in your books? Clark. Clark is difficult at times because Clark is the best person in the world,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like Clark Kent is genuine and he is sincere and he really, really believes in people. And for somebody like me who has his days where I'm very pessimistic and very skeptical of things, he can be some of the hardest to write. I love him. In some ways, you're just like he can be. I said to you before, he's either very easy or he's very hard.
Mm.
And I think you either get it's very easy to get right, it's very easy to get wrong. And I think that Clark at times can be challenging, but also it's because you want to get it right so badly. And there is you just want to get Clark right, and so it's like he's in some ways the best character to write, sometimes the easiest character to write, because when you're just like when you're writing a character, it's like always gonna do the right thing.
Yeah.
Who's always gonna be the best person in the room, but doesn't even know that about themselves.
Right.
Doesn't feel that way, and
Would
is
never
also
accept that as a
would never
compliment.
accept it, and it's just like, I'm just a farm boy who grew up on a farm, you know?
Yeah.
Like that can be challenging at times, but also a blast. I was always very lucky to have some of these characters in my heads over the years, you know. So yeah, he'd be definitely challenging, but I love him, but he could be challenging. What is this one? I'd love to hear about the approach to writing the second issue in particular. Character world themes are even out of motion, and have been out in motion, introduced to the read, but going from there to into two. I'm sure the length of run plays a big part. Many are ongoing. Still would be interested to hear Josh speak on it. Yeah, it's like pilots. Whenever it's interesting when you're watching a show and you see the rawness of the pilot.
Yeah.
What I've kind of noticed at times though is the second episode is always a little rougher
Mm.
in some ways, because I think so much of the first issue, you know what you have to do with the first issue. The first issue is so much of setup is really it, and explaining the idea, getting across all those things, the vibe, the tone, like you're talking about the world building of it all. That when you get to the second issue or episode, whatever you're working on, then you're just like, well, now I gotta show this it works in practice,
Yes.
right? Like that's it. It's like it's funny when you talk about like Hollywood pitches and stuff like that, where people are like, I just want to know what the show is. Like I understand. Like that's one of the questions is like, what would a typical episode look like,
Yeah.
right? Like I understand all this, but then how do you keep it going? How do you particularly keep this concept going as an ongoing? The second episode, the second issue is the first time to really apply that idea. It can be challenging. Like second issues can sometimes be harder than it can be harder than the first one, because you're just like the first one. I know what I'm doing. Like it's all introductions in a way. It's me bringing you in, right? And then now when you get to the second one, you're just like, okay, now it's none of that. Now you know what I mean? It's like it can be really challenging to do second. But that's why I really believe in outlines. So what I would say to you is, you're not writing the second issue. You were trying to figure out that whole arc. You're trying to figure out what your year looks like. When we were doing Duke and GI Joe or Cobra Commander, I spent a lot of time on the outlines on those. A lot of time on the outlines on those, and so when it came time to write issue twos for those, real
Yeah.
easy, because I already had it mapped out. So try to look at the big picture a little bit more of it, and then you can kind of see what you need two to be, because you know what three needs to be, four needs to be. Like if you do look at it from that, you know, that's how I would say to kind of solve that, is to look at the bigger picture. Don't try to zero in a little bit. You know, I'm not a believer of. There are some writers that you and I know and are friends with who are like, I'm just gonna write the page in front of me. I'm writing the script in front of me. I'm like, nope, I gotta know this. I gotta know this. I have some kind of benchmarks to work off of, because that helps a lot. If you don't have those benchmarks, you're gonna get lost and it's gonna take forever.
Yeah.
Oh man, how many questions? Oh my god, there's so
I
many
know.
questions. This next one we're gonna be doing a lot. All right, I'm gonna do one more,
All right.
and then we'll do okay. What is the collaboration process for a writer and artist? How much input can artists have on your story? Is there ever times you have to tell an artist something isn't working? Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. And there are times they tell me the same thing. You know? There are times when artists might be like, hey, I don't like this part, can I do this instead? And you're like, hell yeah, that sounds awesome. Go for it. Like, I
Right.
mean, I'm a big believer that the artist is, you know, you're co-writing it with them, you know, and they spend a lot more time with it. I think we talked about this last time too, where it's like, I would kind of joke of like, when I was working on Flash, it's like 2-page spread, the Flash is running. Done. 2 pages, 2 pages, done for the day. But an artist might take 2, 3, 4 days on that 2-page spread.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking about like, you know, these big fight scenes where it's like 2-page spread, then a list of characters. You know, it's like that might be 2 weeks of that artist's life. They spend a lot of time on it. So they think about it a lot. You should definitely talk to them about it. You should definitely have conversations with it, and you should definitely give them as much information as you can. You know, I mean, I try my best to give the information, tell them what's coming, either email, phone, text, whatever. You know, it depends on the artist relationship. Some aren't interested in that. Some want you to just like give me the script and I'll go. Like some want that. Some want to have those conversations. They want to get on the phone. They want to get on a Zoom. They want to talk about it. And you should do that. And this goes to the formula thing. It's like every artist is different. Every writer is different. Those relationships are different. You know, Mike and I, we did not meet in person until the day Nailbiter #1 came out. And we had already done 5 issues of that book. We did Masks and Monsters together. We did a Ninja Turtles thing together. We had already done a lot before we got to here is like We literally met at the airport. We arrived at a signing, and I didn't even know what he looked like. So it was like we kind of were like, I think that might be him, you know. Um, and then he and I, we never talked on the phone, and we would to this day, a lot of our business was handled over text. Like we would
Wow.
text each other. Hey, I'm thinking about this. What do you think about this? I'm thinking about this. What do you think about this? Hey, I would like to add more of this. You know, like Mike always. So you know, Mike is a big fantasy guy. He loves fantasy. Like he loves Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, right? Nailbiter was not Lord of the Rings, and it was not Star Wars. It was a lot of people standing in fields, like you know what I mean. It was a lot of rainy scenes in a small town, and here's a barn in the background. It's like
Yeah.
it was a lot of that. And so with Mike, because you know, it's like I don't want Mike to lose interest on engagement. I would try to find ways to add elements that I knew he would have fun doing. I knew would you know scratch those itches for him. So I think that's something when you're working on this stuff, it really depends, but it's like as much communication as you can. You know, Brian Michael Bendis has talked about this a lot when he talked about his relationship with Mike Oeming and his relationship with David Mack and the different people he's worked with. That, you know, when you're especially doing create your own books, and you and I have talked about this too, where it's like when you're doing create your own books, you are making a baby with that person. And
Yeah.
so if you're making the decision to make a baby with that person, you butter be into them. Like you butter. And so it is like, I mean, we always have some words a little bit like dating or things like that, where it is like you're really, when you're working on these books, you are creating something together. And the best version of that is when you do it together and you have good communication. Um, Not to say every time it has to be that math. You know, there are times where I've worked on books and never spoken to that artist before, but been like, this, I'm so happy with this. I'm so proud of this book. But there are times, you know, it's like working on, especially Create Your Own, you really better have good communication on Create Your Own because you are doing something that's going to bond you guys potentially forever. Because if it's a hit, you guys are going to be, that's
Oh
it, you
yeah,
know?
you're not going to be able to get rid of each other. It's true.
No, in some way or another, you're always going to be in each other's lives. And when it comes to superhero books, it's a little different, like when you're doing Marvel and DC stuff, because you have other pieces of that puzzle. There's editorial, there's other pieces of that puzzle. But you want to communicate with them as much as possible. You want to talk to them. You know, I think that's really what that relationship is like, is being able to have as much communication as possible between both of you, and really being able to like share ideas back and forth. And when I turn my scripts over, like, listen, I could be a control freak. So it's like when I give my scripts to either editorial, when I hand over to the artist, I do try to really express that like we are in this together, we are a team. And if you have notes or you have changes or anything that you want to amp it up, or you think there's a better way to tell this story, please reach out. Like, let me know. And you know, some people will just be like, I'm just doing it, and they just do it. Sometimes I'll get these long emails with a ton of questions, which I love, because a lot of times those questions are like they're catching something to think about, and you're just
Yeah.
like, or was not clear. And so it's like, oh, I want that. So it's like, okay, let me respond. Here's what I'm thinking about. Oh, we can change this. What if we did this instead? It's just as much communication as you can between the two of you, and obviously being respectful of both your ideas. But you know, if you see red flags early on, you know, to address those as well, if you can. You know, but everybody's coming into this best foot forward. Like they really want to make a good book. Like ultimately, that's what everybody's trying to do. Nobody's coming at you to try to make a bad book. You might not agree with each other on the direction of a book sometimes, but their intent is not to make a bad book. Like their
Yeah.
intent is their experience is what they think it should be. Your experience might be different. If you can find ways, I mean, I think, you know, Scott talked about this. Where like Scott and Greg, when they met, they clashed a little bit. You
Yeah.
know, they became this amazing pairing. Um, you know, you guys just communication, talk to each other. That's it. And I would be my advice always when we're working on these books. It's just communicate as much as possible. I mean, I talk about this with like higher ups at DC as well, where it's like communication is key, honesty is key, just really being able to, yeah, communicate. I'm gonna say communicate one more time. No, but that's it. That's it for this one. We will do this again next week. As Sal and I were talking about, we'll do it again next week.
Yep.
We're gonna try and get everybody's questions. I'm cool with this. Probably some point this month we'll talk about comics.
Yeah. Yeah. New books.
We'll probably talk about Superman and some stuff, you know. But yeah, that's it for today. We'll talk again next week.
Thanks a
Thank
lot
you
for
everybody
hanging
for the
out.
questions. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So long, folks.